So let's jump into this Russell Westbrook signing with the Los Angeles Clippers. I'll be honest with you. My immediate reaction was like, why in the world are the Clippers doing this? I do have some trepidations with it that I'm sure we'll talk about. But the more I think about it, the more I'm coming around to it potentially working and being really helpful for the Clippers. I'll just start here. What was your take when you saw it?
I was neutrally positive. Like I think
Your perpetual state,
yeah,
neutrally
yeah.
positive.
I mean, I think the way that I just try to look at it is this isn't a trade. This is them signing somebody on a vet minimum. So I think any
Yeah.
of the automatic, this is a huge loss. I think that's just too much. Like, it can. I mean, the way to put it in two ways for me. I get the similarities to the stats with John Wall, but just in watching them this year, vastly different players in where they're at physically and what they can actually do on court. B, if you want to look at it as a similar situation, exactly. They can phase them out of the rotation if things don't work. But, there's a whole lot to get to before there. I'm interested to see what this looks like. What was your initial reaction?
My initial reaction was worry and that this is not actually what the Clippers need. My initial reaction, I'm going to dive into why I've kind of adjusted a little bit more, but my initial reaction was this is an offense that tends to be very stagnant in the half court and tends to really struggle to move the ball. And Russell Westbrook is someone that can stagnate offenses. Unfortunately, he is someone that does like to dribble quite a bit. So I was worried a little bit about what that could look like in terms of their offense getting even more ball stoppery and even more ISO driven than what it is already, because this offense, it has not been very good this year. This is the team that, they're fourth in the Western Conference, but they are 19th in offensive rating, despite the fact that they have Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. And often and shooting and floor spacing all around those guys, right? This offense should be drastically better, but the process is often very difficult. And I typically do not associate Russell Westbrook with being a process driven player, right? I actually have quite liked what Terrence Mann has done as the point guard because he's completely unselfish. He's willing to get his teammates involved. He just moves the ball around the perimeter, right? But the more I thought about it, the more I actually kind of like it for the Clippers, having considered more about what their actual needs are beyond just offensive stagnation. This is a very slow pace team, right? They are 25th in pace right now. Part of the idea of John Wall and part of the idea of what I think the players on the roster want is they want someone who can get up tempo. They want someone who can create fast break opportunities. I think that's why, even beyond their relationship from having grown up in Los Angeles around the same time, from having played with Oklahoma City together, I think that that's kind of what Paul George has been wanting from a skill set perspective throughout this season, it seems like, from the point guard position. The thing that Russell Westbrook does that this team doesn't really do is he does still pressure the paint. Like, he is capable of getting into the lane. It's just what happens when that happens, right? With the Lakers, because they didn't have any floor spacing around him, there was just nobody to kick it out to. There was always a ton of bodies in the paint, right? With the Clippers, they actually have the floor spacing to where this could work. Like, Kawhi and Paul George are guys you have to stay attached to. Norman Powell is a 40% three-point shooter. Marcus Morris is a guy that teams stay attached to in the corner. Eric Gordon can really knock down shots. Terrence Mann, I don't know if teams necessarily stay attached to him, but he will hurt you if he's in the corner on a kick out, as we've seen throughout his career. Bones Highland can knock down shots. Nicholas Batum is a guy that's like a 38% three-point shooter. They have the shooting around him to make it work in smaller lineups. The thing that they don't have is a floor spacing center, unless you believe in Mason Plumlee's weirdo lefty mid-range shots now, which I don't think any opposing teams will consider as a concern. So I like the idea now of them being able to pressure the paint. And I like the idea of this roster fit around Russ a little bit more than what the Lakers fit was. And for a minimum, I think it's okay. I guess is what I've come around to. Like, I think this is a reasonable high upside swing that could work for them in a tangible way.
Yeah, no, I think that's where I approach it in the same light. I like you mentioned, I think the whole idea is just can he pressure the paint? Like, and this is to me a much better fit than what the Lakers were. They're not going to need the same minutes volume. They're not going to need the same volume of just anything from him, which I think, figuring out what that means between him and the team is going to be important. Like there was, I don't want to say conflicting reporting, but like in Woj's initial story, basically had it that there had been discussions between him and the team about having, playing a very specific certain role, which automatically makes you think, okay, maybe there's a little bit, to be optimistic about here. But then Law Murray from The Athletic, who is of course tapped in with the Clippers, that's his job, he's fantastic at it, reported that it was looking like it's potential that he'll start. And so I am interested to see what that dynamic looks like. I do just want to caution people. I don't think it's the end of the world for us starts. I think a lot of it's more, what does this look like with closing lineups? What does this look like with how they manage lineups in general? Because I do, to be fair to Clippers fans, I haven't watched as many Clippers games as every Clipper fan. I do think that Ty Lue's lineups have been frustrating at times this year, but also I just don't think that the roster's been as good as it's made out to be sometimes. Like this is it's different than the Raptors roster because they have Paul George and Kawhi, but it's a lot of the same light of we have a lot of guys who are versatile, but not really the guys to unlock that versatility. And I think the idea is, okay, well, maybe Russ can bring some of the things that Terrence Mann does, but maybe to an even higher level. And that, as we've seen, like can help unlock some of what this team that's comprised of a lot of wings and guys who aren't going to create their own easy looks. Like, I think that there's credence to, okay, maybe we can get something out of that. Having somebody who can and will push the pace. I'm interested to see what that looks like. I really want to see what, like you mentioned, there's no real floor spacing big, but even when, like when you go back to Russ's time in Washington, I mean, he and Daniel Gafford developed some good chemistry down the back end of that season when Washington really started to find their way. And I think him and Zoo, like Zoo's just a better big than Daniel Gafford right now on both ends of the court. And I think you can credibly say, okay, well, yes, you want to be quote unquote 5 out, but I think that's not necessarily the best for us. I think having a guy who can be a really good screener, who can open up things as a roller for him too, can be really good.
Both him and Plumlee, by the way. Like Plumlee is also
sure.
a very good partner in dribble handoffs and in screening situations. He's a good roller. He's a really good passer from the high post if you short roll him. There is a lot there. I think they have a lot there from a big perspective that will help Russ.
Yeah. So I think for that, like I'm interested by that. Obviously, you're going to have what if Russ is taking a bunch of pull-up twos? Like, yeah, that's a fair point. But at the same point too, a lot of guys on this roster are taking pull-up twos already. Like I'm not meaning to be demeaning. Like, I mean, there are guys on the roster who I'd rather see Paul George or Kawhi take a pull-up two. Like, of course, but I think a lot's just going to be what is the push-pull of what they get out of Russ compared to what they get when he's on the bench or when he's not playing. And I think it's worth seeing. And to me, again, like I'd like to think that they're smart enough to know what they've gotten out of Terrence, and this eats more into Bones Highland's minutes or like Eric Gordon's minutes. Like I think that's what I'm looking at more instead of this is going to just deteriorate everything Terrence Mann's doing. Because if that happens, then I'll be kind of concerned. But I need to see it happen in that way before I get too stressed about it.
What do you think their best closing lineup is? Because that's what I've been trying to figure out. Is Russ a part of that closing lineup?
Well, I think part of what's fun about this group is it depends.
I'm so glad you answered that way because that's going to be my answer.
Well, that's part of it's part of what's been so frustrating about this roster for 3 years, but also exciting because like the ability for them to kind of match up how they want against anybody is exciting. But I think, again, part of why I'm interested to see if Russ can unlock some stuff for them is that helps them actually make it harder for teams to have to match up with them. Because it feels so often like teams don't necessarily get dictated by the lineups the Clippers put out. Obviously in the playoffs it's happened, but I think like this year and watch them, and a lot of times during the regular season, it's just kind of like, well, we're pretty comfortable just if we can just switch everything against you and force you into somewhat tough stuff. We don't care. Like again, that matters more in the playoffs when things are a little bit different. But point being, like I think the idea here is Russ is going to be comfortable in knowing that, or hopefully, that he might not be part of every lineup. He might not be part of the closing lineups because I think there are going to be games where it's probably not for the best for him to be out there. Like maybe there are games where it's better to run a pretty big lineup with like, I don't think that you really want PG or Kawhi at the one, but you get what I'm saying. Like just going like, okay, maybe you have like Morris, Leonard, George, Eric Gordon, and Nick Batum out there or something like that. Like it's not perfect, but I think again, like there are ways to look at it where I think that makes sense. But
yeah, I think where I'm at is I don't want Zubats and Russ to close together. I would like one of the two, and I think it would be dependent on the opposing team's lineup and construction. Like if they're playing Denver in a second round playoff series, right? I would like to see a situation where it's Terrence Mann, Kawhi, Paul George, Marcus Morris, and Zubats, or replace Marcus Morris with Batum, replace Marcus Morris with Eric Gordon, replace, Terrence Mann with Norman Powell, whatever you want to do, right? Part of what has made this roster so interesting over the years is how multiple they have potential to be in terms of the way they can match up with teams in the playoffs, right? They can go big or they can go small. This gives them, if it works out, more flexibility offensively to make the smaller lineups work in terms of getting dribble penetration. I don't know that it necessarily helps the bigger lineups work, which I think is often where their offense can stagnate a little bit. It is possible, I guess, that maybe Russ can drive play to the point where playing small does become a real marginal advantage for them. I'm a little bit skeptical of that, but it's not impossible as an outcome at the very least, that like they just play small around Russ, Kawhi and Paul George, get actual marginal advantages created for them because teams have to collapse down on Russ driving into the paint because there's actual floor spacing. I don't know. I mean, I think it's not impossible that this works out really well. And honestly, I'm rooting for this to work out well. As people know, this has been like a Russ-friendly podcast, I think, right? Yeah. I have been a fan of Russell Westbrook for a long time. I get that he can be a bit prickly. I get that like he can be whoever. I also know that, Russ is someone where it's just reported by someone that asks, ushers and people around the team who the best tippers are. It's Russell Westbrook. Like he does an incredible amount in the community. People are complicated. People are very, very, very complicated individuals in many cases. And I think Russell Westbrook is one of those people. And I think people often deride him unfairly in some way and put a lot of attention on him when he has been a very clear Hall of Famer, top 75 player of all time, former MVP, everything like that. And while he has not aged gracefully necessarily over the last 2 years, I want to see him in a different situation. And I frankly will be rooting for this situation to work well, because it would be a very cool story if Russell Westbrook goes to the other Los Angeles team, joins his friend Paul George to team up in the city where they grew up, and leads the Clippers to an NBA title. That's like the coolest possible story, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. And I just to go off that too, like and not to go too long-winded on this, because I just think most of the time it's not worth giving a lot of the negative stuff credibility, but I have been really frustrated with how people have talked about Russ in general. Like I get it to a degree, like watching him can be frustrating, but at the same time, like separate player and person, get over yourself. I don't really care. I can't really care if he gets prickly with media. Like exactly like you mentioned, he's so well documented, and without his, like, it's not like him documenting himself. Like it's very clear, like this dude is a good dude off the court, as far as standards go for what it is to be a professional athlete. And I just can't be bothered that he's having a rough season and you wanted to ride him for that. Like, Get over it. Like exactly what you said. He's a clear Hall of Famer. He's an MVP. You can dispute it all you want, but I mean, I think way too easily people forget how good he was in OKC. And
Unreal.
as a very fun throwback, because a friend of mine pointed this out to me. You want to know how many years ago it was that he and Paul George were playing together?
It's probably 5
It's been 5 years since they
Yeah.
last played together, which makes me want to throw up in my mouth a little bit.
I mean, 2 years in LA and then 2 years in Washington and a year in Houston, right?
Not even, it was 1 year in Washington. That was it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So
That's crazy.
yeah, I mean, it's been a while. I'm excited to see it. Whatever this turns out, and it could turn out very poorly. Like if Russ takes possessions from Paul George and Kawhi, that won't go well, and they might have to bench him. And it seemed like things didn't go well with the Lakers when that happened. But I hope it goes well. I hope that they figure this out because I think it'd be a really cool story. I don't know that I guess I am kind of getting my hopes up by explaining why I think this could work, but I also am realistic about the fact that this is probably Russ's last chance to really be a difference maker in the NBA, and there's a chance that he's just not that anymore. But we'll see. I think it's a sensible signing from the Clippers. I've come around to it potentially working.